Hello, and welcome to the Waves webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about how to get live vocal perfection, presented by Waves live artist, Zito. But before we get started, I'm going to take a minute and go through the format of the webinar for anybody that hasn't done one of these before. My name is Yoni and I'm the moderator. You can't see me, but I'm here working behind the scenes to help make sure everything runs smoothly. The webinar will last about an hour and has two parts to it. The first half will be a presentation from Zito, where he'll show you his approach to mixing live vocals and how he deals with the various challenging factors that occur during a live show. The second half of the webinar will be an open Q&A. Feel free to submit any questions you have, and based on how much time there is, we'll try and answer as many of them as we can get to. You can send your questions in at any time, but you won't see them right away in the chat, as they'll first go to me, and then I'll feed them to Zito one at a time. Keep in mind that there are a lot of people online with us today, so we appreciate your patience while you wait to have your questions answered. Now let me hand things over to our presenter for today. His work with such renowned vocal artists like Babyface, the Backstreet Boys, and Billy Currington has given him a level of expertise in mixing live vocals that can only come with the experience of being on the road with some of the best. We're really glad he could be with us here today and believe you will be too. So please welcome Zito.
Hello everybody, this is Zito and I am coming at you live from my home here in Nashville, Tennessee. Excited to be a part of this opportunity with Waves, to go through, show a few of the things that I'm doing, that I'm using in my live mix for Waves plugins. I am a front of house engineer, also production manager and a tour manager. Do a variety of all of the things, but my main focus has always been engineering. If I don't get to mix, I'm really not interested in the gig. I'm all about really about audio. I'm an audiophile. I love to have my hands on a desk and get to have that aspect of the live show. I want to tell you a little brief history about myself, who I've worked for. I've been the primary front of house engineer for a lot of random artists. Worked for Backstreet Boys as their primary front house engineer the last 5 years, since 2007. I worked for Babyface, country artist Billy Currington. Last year was out with a new artist on Interscope that we were developing, Skylar Gray. About to head out with Sum 41 in a couple weeks to do an Asia tour. And earlier this year was out with Nick Carter, who's one of the Backstreet Boys, who did a solo tour. We did it last fall, went to Japan and Canada, and then went earlier this year, did a US leg. My background, I used to own a studio when I lived in Chicago, so from early on, I've always incorporated into my live show plugins. I grew up in an age, I've been mixing and been in the entertainment industry for about 16 years now, and when I started out, is when digital consoles were starting to become popular, started to see them everywhere. So I kind of had the privilege of incorporating that into my workflow to learn on these desks, become familiar with them, the way that they work, the way that they operate. And then when I owned a studio, we used Waves plugins, so it was when the venue system came out, it was really an easy transition for me to be able to move right into that. Today, what I'm going to be doing, I own a couple of consoles. One of the side businesses that I run is a rental company. Today I'm set up here in my home in Nashville, and I want to tell you a little bit about kind of what we're doing for the demonstration today so that you know what to expect. We're trying something we haven't tried before with Waves. What we're doing is I actually have my venue console set up here. I have a Pro Tools rig. I'm going to be playing back audio to use as a demonstration for kind of some of the things that I'm doing with the vocal. We are VNC'd from my console to the Procaster, to the webinar here. So there's going to be times I'm going to be showing you live screenshots, and these are my actual screenshots, things that I'm doing on the console now. And we're going to go through, show you kind of how I'm using the plugins, what they look like. Because it is a VNC server, there is going to be a little bit of lag by the time it gets to you, and a little bit of lag with the video. So when we get to that point, I'll try to work slowly so that you can actually see what's going on and not move too fast. I wanted to talk just briefly. I know there's probably a variety of you that are not only in the live realm, but some folks that maybe are in just the studio world that want to see what kind of what the approach is and the difference between the approaches. one thing that I wanted to address up front for those that are in the studio world is kind of the variables that we have to deal with in the live world. And I'm going to talk about that at the very beginning, because understanding these principles and understanding those things are really important to how we're going to use the plugins later on and what specifically we're going to do and why we're doing them. The kind of the beauty, the excitement, the appeal of live sound is the fact that it's a different show every single day. There's so many variables. There's a lot of things that the audience changes, the room changes. A lot of times the PA changes. If you're not touring at a level where you're carrying your own PA in production at every show, you're dealing with a different PA system every day, and that can be quite challenging. Every room sounds different. Every PA sounds different, and then their reactions together. The same PA in a different room from day to day will sound completely different. It's a different approach that we have to take in the live world, and we have to tackle those things up front to ensure that we have a consistent product, a consistent show, and consistent results every single day. So it's a little bit different in the world than in the world of a studio, where you have a control room that you know really well, that hopefully you've treated acoustically. You have reference monitors that you know really well. You can trust their response. In this environment, a lot of that you can't trust daily. You have to learn to weed through it to know what you're hearing is accurate, why you're hearing certain things, and kind of how they're working together. So you know what to adjust where. There's so many places along the way, from the vocal to all your inputs, to your EQ, to your crossover settings, to just sheer placement of the PA. And you have to know daily which of those to adjust, why to adjust them. I'm only going to touch on this briefly because I think that it's really important before you can even address a vocal, before you can even start working with the plugins, to take a basic approach to a PA. And I'm just going to talk briefly through how I do it, what I found that has worked for me over the years to give me consistent results. One of the things with touring with Backstreet Boys specifically, actually a lot of the artists I work for, I get a lot of compliments on the consistency of my final product, even though I'm on a variety of different PAs. With Backstreet Boys, when we're touring across the U.S. and Canada, across Europe, we're carrying PA, have the same system tech with me every day, and there's a lot of consistency there. However, the state of the industry and the state of the market is such that it's not financially feasible for a lot of artists to carry their PA to all of these different territories. Backstreet Boys in particular, I'll talk a lot about them today, but we've done 64 countries worldwide. Of those, about half of them is local provided PA every single day, all across Asia, South America, where it's not feasible to carry our own production. We're seeing a different PA every day. And but the artist and the management, the people that are making the decisions to hire me, expect to see the same product every single day. So this is the approach that I take. I'm going to just talk about real briefly here so that you kind of know where I'm coming from, so that what we're doing with the plugins is actually translating. The very first thing I do when I walk up to a PA and once it's all set up and everything's plugged in is I listen to it. And I can't even stress that enough. Before you do anything else, have something that you're familiar with, a CD, your tuning material, something that you know the response of, and listen to it on the PA. You're going to be able to tell a lot right away if there's something drastically wrong just by throwing it up and listening to it. So before I do anything else, that's the first thing that I do, is listen to it with tuning material. The next thing that I do is I'm a big advocate of using Smart, which is a analyzer software. I hope that all of you live engineers are using it. If not, you really need to take the training, take the time to learn it. I use that heavily in mixing. It's kind of a way to not only do some measurements that are really difficult to do by your ear, but also a way that when you're traveling a lot, your ears are getting tired, you're dealing with pressure. It's a way to kind of keep you honest. I like to say, keep things in check so you know exactly what's going on. So after I've listened to the PA, I check the time alignment, make sure that the subs, the mains, my front fills, the side PA hangs if there are, make sure that they're all lined up and everything is now working together. Then I'm going to go real quick, I'm going to throw some pick noise up in the PA, listen to it, check it with Smart, and kind of just see if there's anything that's jumping out at me, things that I know that I need to address right away in the beginning of the tuning process. So that's the very first thing I do. I set a layer. I even out anything that's really weird that's happening with the interaction of the PA in the room, different nodes and things that'll build up, and I try to address those right off the bat. Once I'm done with that, I don't take a long time doing that. I don't pick noise for hours and hours. I just make sure there's nothing major happening issue there. You can see a lot of that right away. Then what I do is I listen to some source material. I'll play that CD that I know really well, and I'll adjust the response of the PA with EQ, pull out anything that is bothering me, and just kind of get the overall tonal shape of the PA into something that I'm used to. So right now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get that PA to a point where it's just like your near fields at home, something that's even, has a good frequency response, and isn't really having any major problems across the frequency spectrum. And then the last thing I do every single time is I always grab my lead vocal mic and I talk into it. I listen to it. I make sure that it's articulate. I ring it out here. I'm going to talk in just a minute about how I'm using some of the plugins with this, and I'll come back to this point, but this is the point, the final thing that I'm doing in the tuning of the PA system is I listen to the lead vocal every single time I do this. Most of the time I prefer to have the monitor engineer on the stage. You can have one of your band guys do it depending on the situation. Have them walk around different spots. I try to not only deal with any issues where how I'm using my C6, I'm going to get to that in a second, but I also try to pull out any feedback issues that might be happening there on the vocal channel. Once I'm done, that's my basic approach to tuning the PA. So now I have a reference point. I know that it's acting kind of the way that I want it to. And now I know that my mix from last night, assuming that the instruments are mostly the same and the vocal mics are the same and all that, I know that it's pretty darn close to what it was the night before. And that's a great starting point for me to work from and build my mix. You got to do this first. You got to tune the PA, otherwise you're chasing your tail, and you're going to be tweaking stuff left and right. If I take this approach on a day-to-day basis, there's only 2 to 3 inputs I'm having to do any real EQ to. So make sure that you're taking the time to do this. It's worth it. It should take you, on a bad day, 30 minutes, on a good day, 15 minutes to knock this out and get into a place that's worth working with before you start dealing with your strip EQ. As far as what I view my job as an engineer, I see myself as kind of the bridge. I'm the bridge between the artist, what's happening on the stage, and it's a huge privilege to me. I am the person that takes what they're doing and translates it to the audience. And I want to represent well what the band is doing. They've worked hard on their sounds. They've worked hard to put this music together, and I view it as my responsibility to translate to the audience. I was actually a music major when I went to college, and that has given me a really great background to work with artists and bands, to be able to talk to them, articulate, get a really good idea of what they're trying to achieve, and get that to come through the end product. You have to ask yourself this, and this is leading into what we're talking about here with the webinar, but what is a good mix? In the live world, what is a good mix? And I kind of earlier in my years struggled with the kind of concept of what makes a good mix. Being an audiophile, I listen to records and I want everything to be perfect, and I want the most beautiful reverb, and I want, great effects happening, and I want the kick drum huge and the guitars huge and all of these things. But the bottom line is, in the live environment, and even on records, but especially in the live environment, it is all about the vocal. That vocal has got to be clear, has got to be present, and has got to be understood to the audience. One thing I've learned is that I could walk away from a show feeling like I had a great show, but if that vocal isn't absolutely understandable and people can't hear it, they will walk away saying it was a horrible mix. The general public doesn't hear all the nuances that you're doing, the compression on the snare drum, or the panning on the guitar, or how thick the bass is, or all, the stuff that we kind of get caught up on. They're going to walk away, and 95% of the audience is going to say it was a good or bad mix based solely upon the vocal. And over the years, I've worked for a lot of artists that are known for their vocals, Babyface and Backstreet Boys, Billy Currington, Skylar Grey, J.D. Souther. These guys are known for their vocals. And those vocals have to be clear, present, and understood. So I'm going to kind of walk through here my approach with Waves plugins and what I found over the last few years that has given me the best possible results to make that be the priority. The vocal has got to be the priority. You know, one of the things that's really important is you can't take and address the vocal until you've addressed the mix. Everybody understands that you have to have a place to put your vocal into the mix. And so I'm going to talk just a second about my general preparation of getting my mix ready for the vocal. You know, you have to carve out space. You guys in the studio know that. In the live world, you may not realize that on the same level that they're working in the studio world, but it's really important to create a space. I'm a big advocate of panning things out. I know there's debate about where somebody sits in the room and how they hear it and that sort of thing, but I like to move things around. You got to create a little bit of space up the middle for the vocal to sit. I bang on stereo inputs. I love to have everything and as much in stereo as possible. Even if I take a mono input, I will pan it out and delay it in a lot of cases so that there's a little bit of room in the middle of the vocal to sit. You know, and the other thing too is you really need to take and create a space in the middle. I tend to have some things sit lower than the vocal. I try to make them a little bit duller. I try to keep things that are competing in the frequency range of the vocal. I try to keep them down and a little bit darker to let that vocal sit on top, which tends to be a little bit brighter. And that kind of helps to create a space, to carve out a little bit of sonic room for it. One thing that I do and have started doing lately, a good friend of mine turned me on to this, is that I treat my band mix, my band bus, which is all instrumentation, separate from my vocal bus, which is my lead vocal, group vocals in the case of Backstreet Boys, or main and background vocals. And I treat them separate. And one of the ways that I do that is I do some bus mixing. And all of my inputs, every single instrument on my console get routed to a bus, and that bus gets treated by itself, the band bus, and then the vocals get routed to a bus and get treated by themselves. And once I've tuned the PA, what that allows me to do, like in the case of the vocals, is I have an EQ on that insert for the vocals. If I need to adjust any feedback or things like that, I'm only really adjusting it on the bus where the vocals are happening and not across the whole PA. I use the phrase whoring the PA out. Sometimes depending on where the vocal's positioned and the different situations, you may be fighting some feedback issues. And so I try to deal with that on the vocal level specifically and EQ only that stuff out of the vocals and not the whole mix. Otherwise, you start cutting your PA and you start to really mess up the response of it, then your band starts sounding, poor. So what I'm going to show you here is one of the tricks I'm doing. Like I said, I'm sending everything to a bus, and I'm going to switch over here to one of my screenshots, and I'm going to take you to my outputs and right here to my band bus. And everything here you can see over on the right-hand side. Everything is routed. Everything in my entire mix is routed to this bus, sans vocals. And I'm also taking, and this is one of the cool things that I'm able to do by doing this way, is I'm also running a bus compressor just on the band bus. I found that what this allows me to do is get that band kind of working and moving together. I use this SSL G Master compressor, which is just stinking amazing as a bus compressor or as a final compressor. But the beautiful thing about doing it just on your band bus is it allows the band to get happening, and you can back it right up underneath your vocal. You can kind of keep the band in check and still let the vocal sit just on top. And I'm not a fan of these mixes where the vocal's way on top and the band's way below. What happens if you do your compression on the master bus, your final output, is that when the vocal hits the compressor, which again should be the hottest thing on our mix, when that vocal's hitting the compressor, it's bringing everything down, bringing the band down. So by treating the vocals separately from the band, it lets you get the band right up underneath the vocals, kind of keeps them in check. They're kind of moving and grooving together, and gets the vocal right on top of that. You know, we've talked about how I prepare my mix for the vocal. Now, preparing your vocal for the mix, it really starts in the beginning. You know, we take and we have a lot of choices as engineers, from the vocal mic that we use to the consoles that we're using, and to all of the things that we're using in the mix, all the plugins and things like that. And what it's really important to address these things in the beginning. Don't just throw one vocal mic up there. Don't just throw try different things out. What I've found is that there really is, there's a lot of great vocal mics out there. And don't just default to something. Try some things out here, because I found that if I get the right vocal mic in the right situation with the right artist, I'm doing minimal to no EQ and am able to really to get that vocal to sing without having to fight it. If you have a vocalist that's nasally, don't use a vocal mic that has a boost in the upper mid range. You know, a vocalist that has a lot of low end boomy, don't use something that has terrible proximity effects. And so, really take the time to find the right vocal and the right mic. When I was out with Billy Currington, the country artist, had a lot of people talking about how that vocal, his vocal, was the best live vocal that they'd ever heard. And it was a combination of these Waves plugins that I'm going to show you, and the right vocal mic matched the right vocal. In that case, it was a Shure KSM9. Zero EQ. I never, ever, ever touched the EQ on his vocal mic. High pass filter, that was it. And every single show, the house engineer, the system tech, people would come up and be like, I just can't believe how good his vocal mic sounded. And it was using the right mic for the right person. And this series of plugins that I'm going to show you today that gave me that sort of input. I'm going to kind of talk through my vocal input chain and how I approach it from first plug-in, first part of the input, all the way to the end. The first thing that I do before I put any plugins in is I go to my strip EQ, the EQ that's on the console itself for the strip, and I try to even out the frequency response to the mic. Here I'm going to show you the screenshot. This is Nick's lead vocal channel. I'm using a Heil PR35 on this tour, which has a lot of bite in the upper mid-range. And one of the beautiful things about this microphone is it doesn't change very much sonically when the artist cups the microphone, and you don't have those feedback issues with other mics. It works really great in this specific application. So before I do anything with plugins, I go to my strip EQ, and I'm trying to even out the frequency response of the vocal with the microphone, and I notch out any things that are bugging me, parts of their vocal, how they're interacting with the input. Now, ultimately on the strip, this is going to be your EQ section is going to be post plugins. However, the whatever you're going to address here is still going to be the end result. If there's issues with the input, you're going to still see them at the end of the chain. They're only going to be compounded when you're adding your compression across the input. So that's the first thing I do. I set my high pass filter, try to get out any low crud that's in there that's not specific to the vocal, as well as notch things out. On Nick's vocal here, because I'm using the PR35, I'm going to show you my very first plugin on the input and why. This is just the DigiDesign DigiRack plugin, which I know is not a Wave-specific plugin. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just using it as a notch filter. This mic has a really high peak at 4K, so I dip it out. Just telling you that up front so that you guys, when you're asking, what's going on, what am I doing here, this is why. So that's the first thing. The second input here that I'm using on Nick's vocal is I'm using the Waves Puig 660, and this thing sounds incredible. I've gone back and forth with my initial channel strip compression, my initial compression, the first compressor that I'm hitting. I'm going between this Puig, the 660, the Fairchild 660, or the LA2A, the CLA2A that Waves has, and both are really great. I found that on vocalists where I need to get a little bit more bite, when it's more aggressive, when it's a a rock artist or a pop artist that's high energy, I tend to use this on it. On artists that have more of an even response in their vocal, ballads, things like that, I tend to use the LA2A and get really good results out of that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take and play a section and let you hear what's going on with just this vocal, this compressor here. So let me go ahead and play you something real quick.
She makes me wanna fly with both feet on the ground. She takes me to that place that I don't wanna come down. She gives me something fresh, someone that is real, separate from the rest, makes me wanna feel.
And I'm going to solo the vocal here so you can hear what's going on.
Invitation to a world that's full of smiles, with our spirits free and wild, girl. But it's a bittersweet sensation, 'cause I never have.
I'm kind of doing the basic gain leveling of the input, trying to get it to a point where it's nice and hot. I like the bite that the 660 gives to it, which is why I'm using it on this artist. It kind of has a nice little aggressive upper mid-range thing that it does that I tend to like on these types of vocals. And I'm trying to do basic gain leveling with it. That's it. 2 to 3 dB of compression on basic stuff. When they really get into the microphone, I could see 5, 6, 8 dB of compression even. So this is the very first thing. One thing I will adjust kind of on a basis, even sometimes daily, is just my threshold. Sometimes they're being a little more aggressive with it. They're really into it, and I'll kind of need to knock it down a little bit. And the other thing is the time constant, which is, if any of you are familiar with this plugin knows, kind of the fixed ratio of how the attack and release are working. I tend to have it a little bit faster here. If it's a more ballady thing type of artist, to go to a 3. None of that is on the LA2A, which is one of the reasons I love it. It's simple, it's clean, it does a great job at it. And so you can use both. I might experiment with it and see what works best for you. The next plugin that I'm going to show you is the Waves, the C6. And guys, you got to use this. You've got to have this plugin in your arsenal. This is, in my opinion, the best possible tool that you can have. I cannot live without this plugin. This is to me the key to making your vocal translate. And not just vocals, this thing is a general beast as far as all sorts of inputs, both in working with, not only working with vocals, but other things across the board, you know, really helping you notch out frequencies. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands the basic principle and why we're using a multiband compressor and not EQing certain things. You know, one of the reasons that this works so well, especially with the vocal, is, you know, you may have, like specifically one thing I like to use is the low end as an example. When an artist gets right up onto a microphone, you have that exaggerated low end response proximity effect of the microphone, and they back off, that goes away, and now the vocal's left sounding thin. So if you really start to, change those things on the microphone, on your EQ, on the channel strip, all you're doing is thinning out the vocal, and you're going to constantly fight that. It's going to change as they get closer to the mic, as they're singing differently, higher in the range, lower than their range. You end up chasing that. And so by using the multiband compressor, you're not having to pull that out. You're actually able to control those frequencies. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the C6 to, specifically in this situation on the vocal input, I'm using the C6 to even the frequency response of the microphone of the vocal input in the room. This is something that I go to daily in my tuning process when I'm listening to the vocal, and kind of make minor tweaks and adjustments based upon how the vocal mic's interacting with the room. And I'm going to kind of go through and show you each of these bands, how I'm using them, and I'll work through this pretty quick here. I'm going to play an example here so that you can kind of hear what's going on. I try to separate out, primarily looking at the bands 2 through 5, which are the 4 main bands, not the floating bands. The C6 has 6 frequency bands that you can work with. The 2 overlap, 1 and 6 kind of overlap. So 2 through 5 are separated, and I try to separate the general regions of the vocal. The low end stuff, which I basically is anything to me under 200 hertz. The mid, kind of the body of the vocal, the low mids, and this is kind of a big range, will go anywhere. In this case, you'll see I got it going from the lower ends at the 160, 170 mark up to 2.5, where kind of the bite of the vocal comes in. And then you have the 2 to 6K, 2 to 5K range, which is kind of that bite. And then moving upwards, you have the 6 on up, which is kind of the air, the breath, the sibilance of the vocal mic. And so I address each of those separately. So I'm going to play something here and kind of solo the bands. This is one thing you need to get used to on the C6. It's going to be a huge tool for you, is to learn to solo your bands. You can't do this in a mix because it is destructive. You're soloing it live in the mix. But what it's doing here is I'm going to just play the vocal, and we're going to go through and listen to each of the 4 bands so you can kind of hear how they're separated out. And one note, it's really kind of a cool trick I learned. When you solo this low band here, this is really a great place for you to adjust your high-pass filter, because you can hear what's happening in the low end specifically, and because you have the crossover on the top, everything above wherever you have it set is being pulled out by the because you've got the low end soloed. You can then kind of adjust really nice and even that the high pass filter, kind of cut out any of the garbage that doesn't belong in the vocal mic. So I'm going to go through and solo these up so you can hear kind of how I've broken them up. All right, so there's the low band, which you could probably barely hear. Those of you who are on computer speakers probably can't hear that. So I'll go right to the mid band.
Wishing you were mine, keep you in my dreams, like you deep inside.
All right, so that's kind of the meat, the body of the vocal. There's kind of the bite. And there's the air, kind of the top end and the sibilance. And then here's everything.
No matter how far.
All right, so I have the vocal soloed up right now. I'll put it back into the mix.
Every day, and with every breath I take, I'm blown away. She make a woman cry with one look deep into her eyes. I'm waiting, make you crazy. It's so amazing. She's special. What's your
Okay, now I will, depending on the vocalist and the microphone, and I will adjust these bands a little bit. I try to put into the low band anything, the low stuff, the really deep, anything, that part of the vocal, kind of the lower end of the throat, into the low band, the meat, the kind of thickness of it in that mid band. And I try to find where that vocal tends to bite and put that on the this mid band, and again, the top end on the vocal in the upper band. Now, on a daily basis, I'll go into these bands. Generally, what I'll do is if I need a little more bite on the vocal, I'll loosen up right here, my threshold. I'll bring it up just a little bit on that part of the vocal if I need a little more bite. If the top end's a little unruly, what I'll do is I'll take and kind of bring that down a little bit. And you could see on this particular vocal, on this preset that I've made, I am doing a little bit of a boost on the top end from 6.4 on up, just to add a little bit of kind of that air to the vocal. I'm really doing that for the purposes of this demonstration. Live, I rarely bring that up. That's 0.7 dB. I rarely bring that up because the PA systems don't have a linear response. It takes a lot more energy to produce the lower aspect of the range than it does the upper mid range and the top end. And so a lot of times those upper frequencies, the things that are coming out of the horns, tend to be exaggerated. So you really a lot of times don't need, you're fighting it more than needing it. And let me show you how I'm using these 2 mid bands. I use them kind of in 2 different ways. This first, or floating band. This first floating band, what I've found is that almost every vocal has some sort of range between 200 and 280 cycles that tend to jump out and really are over-exaggerated, especially in the room. So when I'm doing my tuning, one of the things that I do every day is I take and solo this band up, and I have the person that's working with me kind of give me a little bit of that low end, and inevitably you will always find one of these frequencies resonating in the room. I don't know specifically why that is, but it seems every single PA that I've worked on has that sort of issue. And so what I'm doing here is I'm taking and actually floating this band and trying to knock that out of the PA system so that it's a little bit more of an even response. So I solo this band up, I solo the vocal up, and just have it coming through the PA, and I'll really try to focus in on where that takes off in the room. So I'll show you what that sounds like. Now, you're not going to have that same sort of resonance that you have in the PA, but it becomes extremely obvious. And try this out; you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Extremely obvious where that cut needs to be at. So I'll play for you a little bit of a section. You won't get the whole idea, but you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. And so on a PA system, you'll really hear how these frequencies will react. And this doesn't specifically apply to the studio environment. This is something that I really only focus on live. The other thing that I'm doing is doing something usually in the 400s, and it's usually pretty close to the octave of this 200 cycle thing that I'm doing. You'll always kind of hear this part, which is kind of a boxiness and muddiness in the vocal. So I try to address those specifically here with the multiband.
One look deep into her eyes, outrageous, make you crazy. It's so amazing, she's special. Watch over you, girl, I will follow.
And one other thing I'll do here, I'm not using in this application, so I'll just talk about it briefly. But a lot of times, if I'm not using this band right here, this 400 band, I don't really need it in the vocal. Or if it's a female vocalist specifically, and I'm not having to fight kind of that low stuff as much, I'll move this band here all the way up and use it kind of as a de-esser. I'll solo it up the same way that I just showed you, and I'll move it around and really find that specific frequency that their S's are sizzling on, and really try to notch that out. And another thing to note here on this low band, if you have an artist that kind of has a lot of issues with P's and popping and B's and those really aggressive sounds coming out of them, I don't in this specific situation. Take this band here, this band here, the low band, and you want it nice and fast attack, really fast, something along that lines, and I take my decay up a little bit more like that, and it helps to even out that part of the vocal. And you can even take your range, which is kind of your compression ratio, and bring that down. And I would do something along the lines of that, and let you see what that looks like if I'm trying to address an issue with kind of popping and that sort of thing. The last thing that I'm using on the vocal chain that I want to talk over real quick is I get to it here real quick, the vocal rider. This is something that, pop it in. This is something that I've been working with lately. Waves got me hooked up with and have been really trying to work this into my mix. I found it's really a great way to it's that final stage. This is the very last plugin. After you've done your compression, after you've addressed the frequency response of the room, use the C6, got your vocal where it needs to sit, and I'm going to show you with a different example kind of how it works. Because I'm setting up my mix already with a band bus, this is specific for the DigiDesign and how it needs to work. But the vocal rider really only works specifically when you're keying it off of your band input. So because I already have my band bus happening, what I've done is routed my band bus, this is on the DigiDesign, out of 2 outputs and into a channel. You can only key source on this console on a channel, so what I've done is run out of that bus into a channel with a physical cable, and you'll see here I've got a band bus where it's brought back in, and this is solely for the purpose of keying this vocal rider input. And so what I'm going to do is play another example. This is kind of the final stage. This is the vocal rider live, and this is the last part to kind of help your vocal work with the mix, get it right where it needs to sit. Let me play an example, and then I'll kind of talk about how I'm using it.
I'm waking up, you're going to sleep, and I wonder, are you thinking of me? Sing it, you know. I'm getting ready for another day without you, and you're just starting to dream. It's hard to let it go, to make it through that day. It's hard to hold on, we were both so far away. Maybe we could just move on and get on with our lives. Survive. You know the words? 1, 2, when our hearts are so connected.
All right, so you can see what I'm doing there. Keying it in, adjusting the music. I don't want it to be too far above the mix. You set your target range right here. Watch your input, set your target range, and then you'll actually set the range, which is how much that it boosts and reduces the input. You can see I have it set negative 3.4 up to 5 dB. It helps it to get above the mix. This is a pop artist. It's Nick Carter. He's a Backstreet Boy. You got to hear his vocals, so I tend to have it written a little bit hotter than I would on another mix, but you can always bring that down a couple of dB and use it like that. Lastly, I'm briefly going to touch on this. I'll show you the vocal effects that I'm using. I love effects. It's kind of one of the few things that we get to do where we really get to be creative and have fun with it. But at the end of the day, it's kind of combat audio. We're faced with a different PA. We're faced with the different response of the room and all these sorts of things. And the effects are the last thing that come into play. A lot of days the room's so live and reverberant that I'm fighting to keep the vocal above it. So I don't use a lot of reverb. On other days, when the room's nice and tight and clean, I'll use more verb. So what I have here is I have just a couple of things that I use. One thing I'll make a quick note on. This is something that I learned from reading about Chris Lord-Alge and how he works. I always lay my console out the exact same way. The lead vocal on the same input, the kick in, the drums, always laid out the same way. And this helps me to work fast and efficiently and not have to think it through. So I work with a lot of different artists to pick up a lot of one-offs in between tours, and by doing this, if I'm working for a new artist, like tonight I'm going to be doing this show for a killer new band here in Nashville called The Farrier, and be doing their show. I lay out the console in the same way so I can work fast. I don't have to think about where something's coming back. And that allows me to move from show to show, artist to artist, and kind of always work the same way. And it's one of the reasons I'm able to pick up so much extra work and keep working and really impress people off the start, is because of the fact that I am laying things out consistently. So here's my effects. The first one is just a basic vocal plate. This one I set for the song that we were listening to a second ago. We have just a basic dampened vocal plate. Pretty straightforward. The next one I'm using is this. I'm using a basic doubler. Here I will actually show you. I'll show you this one here so you can hear what's going on.
I'm waking.
Just kind of thickening it up a little bit. Here's the vocal verb. And I always have a DDL plugged in. And then a slap delay.
You know the words? 1, 2, when our hearts are so connected. That's right, that would die, we could take them far.
All right, guys. That hopefully I've talked over everything. I made notes here, did a little outline, so I make sure I talked over all the points I wanted to go over with you guys. That pretty much is going to finish up what I wanted to share with you. I'm happy at this point to take some questions from you guys, and I think we have about 10 to 15 minutes here to go through, take some questions, and I can address anything specifically with the artists I've been working for or any of the things I talked about today. So a question from Ripple here. Is it possible to bypass the effect on and off to get a real sense of what the plugin is doing? Perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do is solo up Nick's lead vocal here. And I'm going to start absolutely bare bones with it. I'm going to start by taking off this EQ, and here, the compressor, the C6, and the vocal rider. And I'm going to also really go all the way and do the channel strip EQ as well.
I'm waking up, you're
all right, so here's the bare
and
vocal.
I wonder why you're thinking of me.
Right. So here I'm going to pop in my EQ, clean up some of that low mud of the vocal. All right, I'm going to take the first EQ, pop in. This is the 4K notch filter. This probably is going to be hard to hear on your computer speakers for reference, but it was really, really apparent on a PA system where, again, you have that non-linear response. All right, next I'm going to pop in the 660.
Cause I can't hold you here.
You know, here now you start to get kind of that beautiful kind of pumpiness of the compressor.
Can love bridge the wilder, overcome the great divide.
Okay. Let me start that over for you.
I'm waking up.
All right, now we're going to go to the C6.
And I wonder why you're thinking of me.
And you'll hear there, it just really cleans up that vocal. Helps the frequency response of the vocal, evens it out. And this is, like I said, especially really, really obvious and present when you get into a PA system. This will start to clean up that stuff that's causing problems. And finally, I'll put it in with the mix, and you can hear the vocal rider. There's without it.
You know the words? 1, 2, when
all right, and here it is. I'll put this back to where I had it for the kind of the pop stuff. I'm not sure how quickly you're able to see the with the VNC, if you can actually see this moving very well or not. But you know, it's kind of moving up and down 3 to 4 here. Let me find another part. And here you can see with this in this specific with this specific song, there's just the piano happening on the intro here, and so because of that, you can see you don't want the vocal to be blaring on top, so it's actually reducing the gain of the vocal. Do you apply this for backing vocals too, and what do you change for that? Yes, I will tend to do this. I won't do it as aggressively. One thing you have to be careful of in the live environment is the more compression you start adding on inputs, especially vocals, the more you end up fighting. The more you'll end up fighting feedback issues because you're reducing the gain. Once you reduce the gain with compression, you have to bring it up in the mix. That reduced gain with the compression is actually going to be something that you're going to fight with feedback. So yes, I do apply this to vocals, back on vocals. But one of the things that I've done that I've had really great results with is I'm big on doing things on groups. That's something that I've always just made sense to me. I know a lot of studio guys do that. I'll route all of my background vocals to a bus, and then what I'll do with the bus is I'll compress it. I'll do this. We'll go here, so you can see what's going on. I'll actually do usually with background vocals, the LA2A compressor on the 2 bus, and compress the background vocals as a group. I've had great results with that, but I tend to go lighter on the compression. But yes, I do pretty much the same thing with the background vocals, but I treat them separately so that they don't ever compete and overtake the lead vocal. Again, it's all about the lead vocal. Okay. Well, hello to Venezuela. I've been down there quite a bit with several artists, Backstreet Boys. So throwing some props back at you. I love. Actually, I've had some great, some fun stories from Venezuela. The question from Matula is, how do you deal with live vocals in small venues like clubs? It tends to always get buried in the mix. You know, here's the thing. Try the approach that I showed you with doing the bus compressor, dealing with the band. What I tend to do a lot of times in that situation, I just did a whole club tour with Nick Carter. We were playing, although we were playing larger clubs in the 1,000 to 2,000 seat caps, but I took that same approach. This is my show file. I try to treat the band separately, and that's really what allows me to get the vocals above the mix. And a lot of times I'll really address the instruments that need to be amplified first and foremost, like the kick drum, snare, bass guitar, and then bring the vocal in, and then I'll start to bring the other stuff up with it, the electric guitars. I'm also really big on isolation. You know, luckily I have artists that understand that this is kind of one of the beautiful things about my history as being a musician and being a music major in college, is that I can have conversations with artists and say to them, you know, listen, I get where you're coming from. I played in bands. I know you want your instrument to sound absolutely as great as it can. And so how do we achieve that? How do we work together? Sometimes it's isolating it. Sometimes it's turning it. Sometimes it's a different tuning or whatever it is. And usually when they start to hear the end result and they hear the comments about, wow, this was the first time that I could hear your guitar right, and this is the first time that I could understand what you're playing, or your snare sound, or whatever it is, then there's that mutual trust, and we are able to work together on it. So you got to address that at the very beginning. Ricardo, what if the band is playing in a coliseum, for example? Do you still use the reverb? Man, it's a daily thing that I choose. When I throw that vocal up, it's pretty obvious. I'll sometimes write it up on ballads, but I found on pop stuff, on rock stuff, where the room is really tends to be really live, I hardly use that at all. I will use the doubler to thicken it up. I'll throw a slap on it. I still do some of my delay changes and things like that. The long digital delay changes to kind of thicken the vocal up, but no, I don't use the reverb in really big situations. If it's a day, I always say if it's a day that I can use the reverb, it's a really great day. So that's there's your answer, Ricardo. Do I set the slap delay the same for the whole show? I actually do. I don't use the slap on every song. It's kind of, for me, the doubler, this Waves doubler that I'm using here. This is really what's doing the thickening of the vocal. That slap, the way that I personally use it, is kind of is an effect, kind of throwback to the 70s with the tape echo, and that's kind of the way that I'm doing it. No, I don't use it on every song, and because I don't use it on every song, it really is it's a cool effect when it comes out. And it's not every artist. I don't use it every show. It's really specific songs that lend itself towards that and have the space for it. Do you ever use wave tunes on live vocal? Well, that's actually a question to direct towards our folks at Waves. I know that they've been working on it, but it actually does not work on the live platform as of yet. I would love for it to. I would love to be proudly using the Waves tune on live vocals, but it is not supported. Not that these artists need any tuning, but I'll throw that out there as a disclaimer. Do you ever put Vocal Rider before the compressor? Would think that it makes the compressor work less hard and be more transparent. Well, I guess it really depends on what you're trying to get out of the compressor. For me, no, it's actually not something that I've tried. It's an interesting thought, but I would think that because the Vocal Rider is has so many variables. It would be kind of hard to get your settings right, especially with the type of compressor that I'm using that has a specific input gain. The two options that I showed you, the 660 and the LA2A, I think that you would tend to be chasing yourself. As far as transparency goes, maybe it's not something that we talk about a lot in the live environment like we do in the studio environment, because there's not much transparent going on. You have a PA with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of watts. You have screaming fans and all this energy happening. It's really about doing what's best for the mix. And while I would love to have it be super transparent, for me, at the end of the day, it's really about getting it to sit right. Nobody's going to notice the compression other than us audiophiles, so I'd use the tools that give me that best result. And I do like the LA2A for that. If you're looking for something that's transparent, that LA2A is a really, really great option for that. And I use that actually about 75% of the time, and the 660 just on more aggressive stuff when I need the bite. But hopefully that answers your question. Is there any delay with those plugs? Yes, there is inherent in any sort of digital processing. We deal with latency issues. That's no different here. It's nominal. Again, in the grand scheme of what's going on, delay compensation runs on the mix and the inserts, and that helps to even out any of those issues. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. It's inevitable with any plugins. But you have to realize in what's happening live environment, you have all these different sources. Everything's coming at you from different times. You have the band coming from all over the stage, so you have those acoustic sounds. You're trying to match those with the sound of things coming out of the PA system. I cue a lot off headphones, so you time align those. And with so much going on, I think the latency that's happening with the vocal is not inherently heard to anybody in the audience. I can barely tell that it's there. And actually, at the end of the day, because the vocalist is 100 feet away from me, I actually can't really tell what's happening. You don't ever perceive it. It is more important with ears when there's not a lot of latency on the console here. It's definitely a little bit more noticeable, but I know a lot of monitor engineers that will use it on the ears and never have anybody complain about it. Do you use venue, channel, EQ, and compression in addition to the plugins? I don't use the channel compression, although I think it is a decent sounding compressor. I have much better results with the wave stuff. It adds a sonic characteristic to the input that I really like. But you can see here that, I talked about that just a little bit, but you can see that I am doing a little bit of EQ on get a little bit of, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but yes, I am using some EQ on the strip here and notching some things out. Like I was saying earlier in the webinar, I use that kind of to even the frequency response of the microphone out, so that notch out any problem areas. Sometimes I will insert that. Here I love the Renaissance EQ. I think it's a great sounding EQ. Works really well. I like parametric EQs, so I will insert that and use that instead of the channel EQ. But this is easier and quicker to get to, and for live audio, that's one of the really keys. You got to be able to move quickly, grab stuff, and get to it when you need it. So that's why I use the channel strip compression, or the channel strip EQ. Sorry, not compression. The channel strip EQ, because it's right in the middle of the console, and I can grab those knobs and do what I need to do. Greetings to Joe in St. Louis. Different EQs between male and female vocals. I kind of take the same basic approach. I tend to like the compressor of the LA2A better than the 660 as far as the way that works for the female vocalist. As far as different plugins, now I use the exact same system, the exact same setup. Most recently with Skylar Gray, who is a really, really talented vocalist, and I use this exact same chain for her, but with the LA2A. And yes, when I go to the let's see if I can. What I will do is I will adjust these bands right here for the vocal, and I'll kind of work with getting those set into place based upon the female vocal. It tends to move just a little bit. There's not all that low end stuff, so because the lower end of the female range, I'll kind of slide this up here to maybe 200 to catch that low stuff. I often don't need, with the female vocalist, I often don't need this low band right here, the floating band, the 250. So I'll move that up to act as a de-esser, which tends to be more of an issue with the female vocalist in at least the ones I've worked with. This right here, I'll kind of work with getting where the top end, the air of the vocal goes, and I'll move this one around trying to get the bite. This will get you started. That was a great general point, and we'll try to get some of these set up as presets so you guys can start here and kind of move around with them. Alex, how do you blend multiple vocals live in a group that is vocal heavy like Backstreet Boys and make them sound like they are glued together? Again, buses. With Backstreet Boys, I've sent everything to a bus compressor. I treat the vocals together. So that's kind of how I'm dealing with that. On Backstreet Boys, because it's 4 vocalists, the vocal writer was a little bit too tough for me because I'm not trying to match the vocals against the band. So I'm actually manually doing them. I've unfortunately or fortunately, no, I love the guys, so I'm very thankful to work for them. But I know every song by heart, every ooh, every ah. And so I'm really trying to ride those things out to keep everybody from fighting each other sonically. And so I'm writing things out. I'd even pan the vocals a little bit, but then I also treat them as a group, and that is kind of the glue that sticks them together. All the vocals go to that group. I hit it with the 660, and that kind of tightens it up at the very end, and I've had really great results with that. Sometimes if you need a little bit more gain, I have to forego that in a situation where the PA is closer or they're underneath it and you're having feedback issues. You need that extra bit of gain back. But on the really great days, good PA and a good venue, that's what I'm able to, that's kind of the approach that I take. Last question here. Do you send any of the plugins to Monitor World, or are they separate from front of house? I actually, that's kind of funny that you asked that. Only in one situation, when I was dealing with an artist that had a lot of wedges, and an artist that will remain unnamed, but a name, everybody would be familiar with. They loved a lot of side fill, a lot of wedges, and they wanted it swimming in reverb. And it was really, really tough for me to deal with that competing reverb from the stage, because it really was that prevalent in the vocal mic. So in that situation, I actually routed the output of my reverb. I sent it up to the stage in the monitor. I used that in the side fills, kind of for that. Aside from that, no, I'm not doing anything else. Although, in this situation, if you're running monitors, I'm guessing maybe. I'm not sure if you're talking about running monitors from front of house, but I would tend to not do that because I think that I would send more of a direct signal. But other than that effect thing, no, I haven't ever experimented with that. Although you got me thinking about different ways I could do it. Would the stage be a better place if it could hear my mix? Anyways, hey guys, I'm really appreciative of everybody that took the time to sign in today, for all of the great questions, and all of the folks that are here. I'm really proud to be a supporter of Waves. Have been really happy to be working with them, a great bunch of folks over the last few years. I can't stress enough how much these tools here, the things that I showed you today, have revolutionized the way that my vocal sits in a mix and keeps me working. Thanks again for all the time. Thanks to the folks at Waves. If anybody has any questions, well, I guess you missed your time to ask them. We'll try to get some of these presets up for anybody that wants to use them. And again, just really proud to be a part of this process and a part of the Waves family. Thanks for tuning in today, guys.
Okay, that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you, Zito, and thank you all for taking part. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like more information about any of the plugins Zito discussed, please visit waveslive.com, where you can also find information about multi-rack sound grid and the variety of formats available for live sound. Also, be sure to look out for upcoming webinars on a variety of topics. Okay, that's it. Thanks again, Zito, and thank you all for attending. Have a great day, and we hope to see you at the next one.